In this session, we'll continue our discussion about positioning. Let's talk about perceptual maps. So perceptual maps is a tool that's used to discuss positioning. It's a very common and popular tool that managers and companies use to understand where their brand is positioned in the minds of customers in relation to other competing brands. So basically, perceptual map is a visual tool to portray perceptual differences among products that are expressed by customers. And it highlights distinguishing positions from the competition. As I will explain shortly, the perceptual maps are driven by dimensions that are valued, that are considered important by customers. And I'll be using the US car market to show you a perceptual map of the US car market. So how do we develop and build perceptual maps? Well, typically it's done through surveys. So you would select a target market, a target segment, and you would identify the attributes that are most important and relevant to customers. And typically, perceptual maps are drawn on a two-dimensional space because it's easy for people to visualize and comprehend things on a two-dimension as opposed to a three or four-dimension. So it's typically plotted on a two-dimensional space. So we identify the attributes that are considered relevant and important amongst customers, and we survey those customers, and we try to get their perceptions about how customers think about different brands on those two identified attributes, and then we plot them on a map. So let's just skip this page because I think this perceptual map about, like I said, about the US automotive market will give you a good idea of what we mean when we say perceptual maps. So here on this perceptual map, we have basically two dimensions that are considered important and relevant by customers. And these are whether the car is conservative or sporty. That comprises the horizontal dimension. And then on the vertical axis, we have whether the car is classy or upscale, or whether it's practical and affordable. And then we plot based on people's perceptions. So perceptions here would be people's, customers' images. These would be brand images of these different brands of cars on these dimensions. So for instance, as you can see here, there are a couple of things that are important to learn on a perceptual map. So the distance between two brands on a perceptual map indicate how the two brands are perceived to be dissimilar in the minds of customers. So for instance, BMW and Porsche are fairly close to one another on the perceptual map. That means that in the minds of customers, these two brands are perceived to be fairly similar. Whereas if you look at BMW and Kia, or BMW and Hyundai, these two brands are fairly far apart on the perceptual map. This indicates that these two brands are perceived to be very different on these two dimensions on a perceptual map. So again, the distance on a perceptual map represents dissimilarity. So the closer they are, the more similar they are. The further they're apart, the more dissimilar they are. So what can we learn from these perceptual maps? Like I said before, the distance between two brands indicate dissimilarity. The closer the two brands are, the more competition exists between the two brands. Because they're more similar to one another, a Porsche would consider BMW to be a closer competitor than Kia or Hyundai. Empty space on a perceptual map can be thought of as the following. Number one, I mean, there's a reason why there may be an empty space and that's not occupied by any of the brands. I mean, it could be just simply it's unattractive. It could be in a space where there's no need to compete because it's just a very unattractive, from an economic sense, from a market, competitive advantage perspective. It's just an unattractive space. Or it could be in a very ideal space that, a lot of the brands are, vying for. They're trying to get there, but for various reasons, for technological reasons, for marketing reasons, they just haven't been able to occupy that space on a perceptual map. The last is that you can conceive of different perceptual maps for different segments. So what this is saying is that different segments, you can construct different perceptual maps for different segments. And that seems logical because different segments will place different importance on different attributes. So for instance, going back to this car example, US car market, I mean, if we take the example of, let's say, 20 to 30-year-olds versus 60 to 70-year-old, if we have two different segments, older, customers versus younger customers, the benefits that they seek or the attributes that they consider important and relevant will be very different. For older people, it could be, reliability and it could be safety. Whereas for the younger generation of customers, it could be driving excitement, exhilaration, or it could be fuel economy because they just, they're not well, they don't have the money yet to afford, the gas guzzlers. So they may be looking for a more economical car. So what this is suggesting is that different segments look for different attributes and benefits. Therefore, it may be wise to construct different perceptual maps for different segments.